Our objectives this afternoon are to discuss some best practices for data analysis with the focus on start of school, identifying curriculum evaluation needs based on your discoveries, and the future of lesson planning and curriculum design in Eduphoria. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn our presentation over to our wonderful host, Emily Cram.
Okay, so we always like to start with an icebreaker to hear from you and kind of get you thinking. So we know it's that time of year that we are about to get accountability results. I know it's a little later than normal, but we really like to stop and have you think. Maybe you don't have a complete crystal ball for this year, but in the past, which area is the strongest for your campus? Or if you're at the district level, you can give us that lens as well. But are you the strongest in teacher lesson planning and content preparation? Are you the strongest in teacher observation and classroom walkthroughs? Or are you the strongest overall in student performance and student growth? So we'll let you think through what is the areas that is the strongest at your campus or your district. And you can respond in the chat with a 1 for lesson planning, a 2 for observation, and a 3 for student performance or growth. So I'm gonna check out what you said, 2. Okay, we had lots of 2s. Okay, so y'all, we may have some principals here. Y'all are the observers. So y'all are doing those walkthroughs. We had a 1. All right, I like the 1. I haven't gotten a 1 so far as feedback when doing this with districts. Got some 2s. We got a 0. I like it, Roxanne. So you're kind of unsure. You're at the 0. I like it. So we really want to give you a second to pause and think about that. We're really going to be reflective of that from the lens that we're really moving into. And like I said, we're about to get that accountability data back. And so we like to have you start thinking about what does that look like? Because as soon as you get that accountability data related to your performance, your growth, and overall those student population groups, then you start saying, how can we improve for next year, right? You start auditing your systems and saying, where do we need to lean to have improvement for the next year? Or in some cases, hopefully not, but you're identifying some broken systems when you get your accountability results back. And that forces you to have a conversation that I kind of laid out right here. If you have low student academic performance, I just wrote a couple of different variables. It could be lesson planning that could be a culprit to do with low academic performance. It could be delivery. It could be assessment alignment. It could be your scope and sequence. It could be the curriculum that you may or may not be following. It could be resources. And so those under each one of these, there's just a couple of the different variables that could fall into low performance in some of these particular areas. And so it makes you pause and think, what practices do you go through at your district or campus to start narrowing it down and saying, okay, it actually is behavior. Behavior is really affecting overall student growth and maybe potentially performance overall as well too. So what are we going to do? So how do you narrow some of these areas down is really what we want you to think about. You have to figure out which one is it. And I joke that is the actual culprit that is involved. And so in my previous position, I always used Eduphoria to help me figure out exactly what those areas were, and then to build strategic systems that were very, very strong in order to build up these particular areas. And it was always nice that you could go back and utilize the tools that we have available for you in Eduphoria. So where we're going to start today is we're going to start with systems that really support success. And we're going to speak about it from these 3 lenses. And so there is that lens of lesson planning that we started out with. What does that lesson planning look like? What does lesson delivery look like? Those can be 2 different things. And then what does your assessment program look like, and how authentic are your assessments, and are they really showing you alignment with performance over time? So we're really going to look at each of those lenses and give you some of these varying different areas that you can audit within yourself, or you can see how you can build a system to help strengthen these different areas through the use of Eduphoria. So I'm going to start with lesson planning, and we're going to kick it off with that direction. And so when I would work with districts in the past, I would walk in and I would ask some of these questions. And so hopefully these are some of the questions you're asking. Maybe you've already asked these over the summer, or you're starting to have these conversations now with principals back on duty. But what does lesson planning look like at your campus? Is it daily? Is it weekly? Does it include ideal resources? Really importantly, does it tie to standards? And what strategies are shown within lesson plan? And of course, that great one of differentiation. So what does all of this look like? Because really and truly, if we don't have these areas, we are missing a really large key component for student success. And so we like to tell you that we have Forethought. Forethought is currently available as a lesson planning tool. And what is absolutely beautiful is our applications speak to one another very seamlessly. And so Forethought and Strive are really good friends, and they share information within each other. And so I really like to start from the lens of Forethought. Forethought allows you to build and utilize a scope and sequence. It does have a standard coverage report that you can run at any time to literally be able to see how many times a standard has been taught within a time period. It has collaborative planners for teachers to work together, resource alignment that can be driven from the district level or from the teacher level, and really importantly, our notes for teacher feedback. And then over time, this data is collected in the teacher evaluation. So some of how this looks is, here's an example of the standard coverage report. And anytime I was working with teachers in the past, I would make sure that they printed out this report. If we gave an assessment, then we really have to know how many times did we teach the standards on the assessment prior to giving it. And this report will give you every single time and the date stamp to go with it. So you can go back and say, oh, we taught this September 1st. Let's go look and see what depth of knowledge we really used in those Bloom's levels. And let's go look at those, because that's how you can really diagnose some key pieces. So we're really asking you to think through, what does lesson planning really look like? And do you have a tool that has really those critical components of standard coverage? And can you give your teachers feedback? I got to be honest, a teacher's lesson plan is honestly usually as good as the feedback they're receiving. So if they do know that their principal is not giving them feedback or not reviewing the lesson plans regularly, then they may not be as vested in those actual lesson plans themselves. So again, if Forethought is not your solution for lesson planning, does your solution offer standard coverage reporting? And does it allow you to give your teachers feedback? Those are really critical components. Some other pieces that I love to discuss that align very, very well when we're talking about auditing systems is that template. You can establish exactly what your teachers are lesson planning every single day. So within Forethought, you can say, this is what we are looking for in your classroom. So we're going to build your lesson planning template to match that. And then it's very critical for you to go in and really make sure that those walkthrough documents have the exact elements that are listed out within that teacher template. It simply makes sense. If the teacher's planning for that, that should be something that you're observing within the classroom, because if not, that teacher is really not necessarily being set up for success if there's not alignment within each one of those. So as we continue to talk through some of these, you can also add in additional layers through Forethought where you build checklist options and you allow teachers to really be very much on target with checking off exactly what these strategies are that they're using. And again, if you have identified some of these strategies as critical, then add them as a checklist option so that you can see exactly how many times teachers are planning to do small groups, cooperative learning. So what do these pieces look like that you are wanting to happen within the classroom, and make sure that there's an element to capture those over time. As we keep talking about some of these things, what of course we recommend is that you really think about it from the lens of that lesson plan should have that Bloom's taxonomy really heavily built into it so that we're understanding the level that we're teaching in order to align with that depth of knowledge level. And so this is a great example of where we have misalignment. And so we could have looked at the standard here on the left, 4.8b, and this standard is written out that it says we're expecting the student to describe and explain. And if the teacher in this case taught the students at a level where the expectation was describing and explaining, and then the test question here on the right is actually written at a lower level, and that would be a depth of knowledge level 1. So we would really anticipate if it were taught at a higher level that students would perform very well on this question type right here. But it's still a great example of misalignment because of this particular question. We really don't know if the student has mastered that standard since they are only identifying areas within the water cycle. They're not actually describing them, nor are they explaining them. So these are why the critical elements exist of going back through and making sure that our lesson plan did align to the actual way that we plan to assess that particular standard. Okay, and then as another final piece, systems that work together very well when you're within Strive, before you walk into a teacher's classroom and start an evaluation or a walkthrough of any kind, there is a little widget tool that's being shown here in the video that you can click on, and if they are utilizing Forethought, you can see their lesson plan. So you can see exactly what the plan is for that classroom today as you're walking in to then see and observe that classroom. And so these key components tie in together along with additional notes that you're pulling all these pieces together. You can see their last walkthroughs and observations as well. So you're getting that holistic picture of the teacher before you walk in. What did I observe last time? What am I really looking for this time? And what does the lesson plan show me? So again, it just makes your life easier because you are a human being and you have a lot of teachers that you're observing. So why not make sure that you have these mechanisms in place, honestly, to make your life a whole lot easier. Okay, so we'll do a quick recap because we really were talking about that lesson planning at this time, and we really wanted to make sure that you heard some of these strategies that really help you put systems in place or start to identify what variables are really breaking within your system. And so which one of these strategies spoke to you the most? We're going to get to hear from you. One being that standard coverage report. Are you thinking, wow, we really need some sort of element of how many times standards are covered over time to align to our assessment process? Are you really leaning toward 2, where you're saying instructional strategies and adding those in a type of reporting mechanism is outstanding? Teacher collaboration was another piece that was also listed, and then giving teacher feedback. That one's a big one. You can go the easy route too, of course, and you can say all of the above. We'll let you be excited about all of the above. So where were you? 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? Give us some feedback. Okay, I did see 5, 4. I know, giving feedback, right? And it ties to their evaluations. That is huge. That is a big time saver. We had some that you liked all of the above. I'm seeing if there's any variance there. I think we did have a 2. All right, instructional strategies. So hopefully there's some pieces related to this that were new learning for you as well, but making sure that those systems are in place. And again, that's really important because when you're missing one of these pieces, then honestly, you're guessing within the system. Where should we take action? Or I kind of joke when I'm usually with people and I say, you're throwing a dart against a dartboard and you're seeing where it lands. So why not build up these strategies that really play into each other for you to evaluate systems? All right, so I'm going to toss it over to Jeremy, and he's now going to talk about lesson delivery. So the other side of this.
Thank you, Emily. And yeah, when we start to think about lesson delivery, there, of course, we're going to, continue that journey that Emily was talking about as she would visit campuses and districts. But there are a couple like high level questions to just keep in the back of your mind as we look at this. Lesson delivery is, of course, another word for it is instruction, but how is it connected to your evaluation data? Should there be correlations between the lesson delivery and your evaluations? Does one inform the other? In your district, is that something that you are not aware of? And so that next question we would ask when coaching is, what does your walkthrough data actually tell you about your instruction? And so when looking at that, I want to be very clear that when we're talking about performance and the correlation between performance and your walkthrough data or your evaluation data, it's not necessarily flat performance. It's really about student growth, because depending on your context, of course, you may be in a lower performing district that's trying to come out of, potentially IR or something like that. Or you may be a really high performing district where really your goal is to maintain. And sometimes maintaining is that growth, or maybe you're anywhere in between. So really think about that lens of how is your walkthrough and evaluation data? What is it actually telling you? One of the other key questions to keep in mind is, does that data match what you're actually seeing in that student performance? And does your teacher evaluation match that growth?
And one thing I always like to lean in here is, do you know at your campus, what are your highest domains and your highest dimensions? And what are your lowest areas? Because that's a really critical aspect to know. And when you roll into your campus, does everybody kind of know what we're looking for and where those variances are?
Absolutely, yes. And I was going to talk about that on this next portion. So with those key components, Emily really highlighted really well how Strive and Forethought play with each other. You can literally access the teacher's lesson plan through Strive as you're about to conduct that walkthrough or that evaluation. And so something to keep in mind when making these connections is, are you setting up your evaluation framework to match the district and campus needs? So if you've really asked that question and answered, do I know which domain or which dimension specifically is a weak spot or an area of improvement for my campus? Is my evaluation template actually structured for me to gather feedback on that? When you have a district approach to evaluation, which is actually very solid practice, because you need to be able to draw correlations across campuses and across teachers, contents, grade levels. We'll talk about that a little bit more here in a second. But each of these components can actually be tailored. And are you doing that? Are we making sure our walkthrough documentation matches what we're actually expecting teachers to focus on? So if I know as a campus that we need to focus on 2.3 communication, am I going in and intentionally looking at 2.3 with the teachers that I'm in that classroom for? Or contextually, is this a teacher, while my campus is a focus on 2.3, maybe this particular teacher is a 2.1 on achieving expectations? And are we cross-correlating that walkthrough data with our evaluation data? Is there a match? Sometimes walkthroughs are hard to get squeezed into the day, and they become more of a checkbox and a to-do rather than something that becomes a really intentional thing. And so caution yourself on that. Am I actually taking the time to pull open that lesson plan and connect my Strive with my Forethought to decide and try to put context on what I'm about to see as I enter that classroom? Does it match what I'm expecting? Does it match what the teacher expected? Are the students achieving at the level that they need to achieve? And at the end of it, are we aligning our professional development for the year to support those lowest domains and dimensions? Like when you come to the end of the year and we've done our analysis and we've identified 2 or 3 key dimensions, does our back to school professional development, does our recommendations for PD for teachers over the summer, does that match what it is that we're seeing as potential areas of growth for our campuses? So continuing with the appraisal customization, I mentioned before that you can really tailor those frameworks within your documents to highlight and look for things that you're really needing to connect and correlate to those areas of identified improvement. And so within it, like I said, it's really great to have common templates across the entire district. But if you're in one of those situations where you've identified a common thread everywhere, it's okay to customize and tailor that template to include look-fors and very specific feedback loops to identify or to really target that area that you've identified as a piece of growth. So consider going back in from year to year and create appraisal documents that match any role within your district. This is not necessarily just your teachers, but you can do it with your paraprofessionals. You can do it with your principals. You can even do it all the way with the superintendent. And that common thread can be tied into every single type of evaluation document and every role. I do want to point out real fast one thing on this picture that's going to be helpful for the next picture. You see in that top left picture on the evaluation process template, think for just a second, how many of you actually use that due date and that required number of documents and within your templates? Do you actually set a due date at the end of the year? Do you actually require a certain number of walkthroughs and at least one summative? Setting those things actually makes what I'm about to show you even more powerful. Within Strive, there's a wonderful tool that's been around for a couple of years now, but some people may or may not be familiar with it as much. It's the Strive Activity Tracker. With the Strive Activity Tracker, you can actually manage your tasks and get some really in-the-moment feedback to ask myself, what is it I need to do right now? When we're talking about that connection between Strive and Forethought, and looking at the lesson plans, and are my teachers' expectations, are their lessons, are my walkthroughs all in alignment? Sometimes we do have to stop and focus on the task at hand and where am I going to get the most bang for my buck right now? If you've tied those due dates and you've tied those minimum number of documents, the Strive Activity Tracker will tell you, do you have things that are at risk? Do you have things on track? Or do you have things that are overdue? You can do that with goals. You can do that with walkthroughs. You can do that with summatives and everything in between. And so when I look at the activity tracker, if I see things red and yellow that need my immediate attention, I can click immediately on the thing that needs my immediate attention, go straight to the template I need, pull up that Forethought walkthrough, pull up the assessment data that I need to reflect on real fast, and go spend the next 30 to 45 minutes that I've blocked out for walkthroughs and be really intentional about who it is I'm seeing and why I need to see them so that I can get things kind of checked off of my tracker list. Next, I want to talk a little bit about appraiser calibration. It's one thing to make sure you're using all of your tools as effectively as you can across platforms, but within Strive itself, the way that the platforms communicate with each other, particularly in this case, Aware and Strive, we're able to get some really valuable information in our document summaries. With our document summaries, we can use filters to try to narrow in and investigate on what we call a evaluator skew. Evaluator skew is something that is very real in our districts, and we might see from campus to campus, from evaluator to evaluator, or even trends in skew across grade levels or subjects that sometimes we are left-leaning or right-leaning. This image that's popped up in the GIF shows a bunch of purples and pinks and blacks. When you glance at those, you can see sometimes we have maybe a little more distinguished and accomplished in certain dimensions. Sometimes we have more developing and proficiency in certain dimensions. Sometimes some campuses tend to evaluate in a particular direction more than another. Not to say that we're necessarily evaluating harder or not as hard as some other campuses, but when using the document summary, we can get a really clear picture about, is there evaluator skew? Where is that skew? And when it comes to that skew, maybe there's actually a legitimate reason for it to exist. When we look at that skew, you need to narrow in and drill down by the dimension and by the domain and identify potential professional growth opportunities, but also ask yourself those questions. Is there a legitimate reason for that skew? And if there is, maybe it's a skew in a particular dimension that shows this is actually a legitimate area of growth for us. We need to work on 2.3 as an entire campus, as a cohort, as a district. And then we can use some of what we talked about before to tailor some of our documents, tailor our lesson plans and those connections between those things, and make sure that our professional development is actually aligned to those areas and gaps that we've identified. And then to continue on that Strive and Aware connection, there's another really neat document summary that you can do that lets you see student growth and teacher performance compared to each other on a scatter plot. And the student growth component is something that has to be input in the summative evaluation or is potentially connected through student portfolios. But as those student growth components are added, I can see on my scatter plot trends. In a perfect world, low performance in an evaluation would correlate with low student growth. Similarly, high student growth would correlate with high performance. So we should hopefully see a cluster or a line that goes from bottom left to top right. However, in this particular example, there's a weird dot that's kind of up towards the top left. This means that that teacher had incredible t-test scores, but low student growth. I can click on that dot and get immediate information about that teacher. When I click on that dot, a thing pops up on the right and I can see at a glance and pull up the teacher's evaluations, look at the evidence, and then I can drill down even further and really dig for the information I need to identify the cause of that outlier or that skew within our scatter plot, showing how those teachers perform. It helps you draw some conclusions and it helps you identify and really beg the question, what do I need to look at to try to improve either student growth or better align our evaluations to actual student growth? And that's one of those things that's really important when it comes to calibrating our evaluators. Think about ways that if you see particular skews, either on campuses and grade levels, how can I get my evaluators together to do joint evaluations, joint walkthroughs with opportunities to communicate and talk to each other about what it was that we saw, what evidence actually existed to justify a particular rating, and what things did we see in areas like Forethought and Aware to back up the ratings that we're giving in these walkthroughs and in these evaluation templates. So like Emily before, that was a whole lot in a pretty short piece of time. So let's kind of unpack that by giving you another opportunity to interact. What piece of the lesson delivery or lesson plan do you think could be evaluated more frequently for you in your context? Is it 1, the walkthrough document correlated with teaching expectations? 2, analyzing domain and dimension data? 3, aligning professional development with domain and dimension performance? Or 4, identifying trends with appraisers, content areas, grade levels, or campuses? Excellent. Seeing some results come in. Got some 3s and some 4s. There's a 1 looking at that walkthrough correlation. Analyzing domain and dimension data has popped up. Not yet. Lots of aligning PD with domain and dimensions. So it sounds like y'all are identifying it, but you haven't aligned that PD with it yet. So that's good. Excellent. So we can take that next step. I'm loving it. Feel free to keep those responses coming in. We're still taking a look at them, but I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Emily.
Okay, great. Thank you for that feedback. It's always good to hear and have a reminder at this time of year what your systems that you have can do for you. So are you utilizing all those aspects of Strive to make sure that you do know your lowest domains, your lowest dimensions, and then your PD efforts aligning toward that, and you can run great reports to make sure that all of those things are in sync. So it's just really good reminders. We're now going to transition into that assessment lens again. And so this piece is really critical and it ties everything together. And this is usually where we make the most decisions about how we're going to move forward. So we're going to look at that from the lens of district and district or campus data analysis practices. And again, we're really leaning into that trend of, do they align? Are your teachers going and looking at student performance, student growth, and are they monitoring student groups? Do they know how to look at depth of knowledge associated with their questions? So making sure those systems are in alignment. And in order to do that, the greatest tool that we have is creating data views within the system. And we're walking through here through our new navigation, and you can see how much easier it even is to create data view with our new navigation. You can easily click and add multiple assessments to a data view, and you can save them. You can share them. You can easily click to aggregate your data. There's one little button. And do you want to make sure that you aggregate these data pieces? Again, very, very quick and very effective to use. And so some of the pieces that we think about here are going to be what works for your teachers. And so I'm going to hold that thought because I'm going to let you think about that a little more. We're going to talk about that again in a second. As we continue, one thing I will point out at the bottom of each of our screens, we do have a little question mark, and then we have a linked document that will take you to our online help guide. We realize we're talking about a lot of systems and structures here and how they coordinate. And so we want to make sure we give you documentation to help you set all these things up. So once you get a copy of this presentation tomorrow, you'll have all of those links to be able to go back and review. Okay, in addition to the thought of creating these different data views, have you gone in and done that? You may be still at a waiting period. We're still waiting to get some data back, right? But maybe your high schools have already started looking. And so with that in mind, these are really my favorite views that every single year working in a district, I made sure that I had elements of these that existed. And so there is a little picture in the slide deck that says top 5 data views. When you click on it, it will actually take you to a PDF. And this is giving you, I like to call it the recipe, but it's giving you how to create these data views and what I actually call them, but it's giving you the components of what tests you should pull, what columns you should pull, and what information you should summarize. And a lot of times I recommend view this and send it out by campus or share it as a district. So you can look at each one of these as well when you receive, and then create any of these data views yourself. That's really the core concept of making sure that you're able to do it. We even included a video, and it's just a very quick how-to. If you're not as familiar with creating data views, it will walk you through the practice of how to create each of these views and save them within the system. There's one I really am going to lean into. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but some that are really important to look at are going to really be that longitudinal analysis. How does reading do at our campus over multiple years? What does that look like? And what did this year look like in reading compared to last year's? That may open up some eyes and allow you to ask some questions with a different assessment type. And then that naturally leads to the next one that this year alone, I think is very, very powerful. You can create a data view in Aware that allows you to analyze the question type. And this is amazing. You can look at question type tied to the standard and see, okay, when we ask this skill as a multiple choice question, students get it right historically. But when we ask it as a drag and drop or any of those other interactive questions, students tend to miss that concept. And so you're going to be able to analyze if the question type had an impact on how students actually performed over time. That is a great key piece to look at, because that may help you identify areas to scaffold your assessment next year. If we ask this question with a new interactive type, let's make sure we ask it with a multiple choice as well, so we can really start delineating what could be the issue. So again, there's some other data views you can create there to really analyze by subject, to look at that depth of knowledge as well. How are we asking those questions over time and the level of questioning, and then looking at how groups of students have performed over time. So each one of those are available for you. Okay, so the next piece is really, again, it's taking a step back and it's leaning into why is creating a data analysis process so important? And we really want you to kind of pause and think about that. There's a lot of campuses and districts I go out to, and they're like, well, teachers go in and they look at the data and they run reports and they do various different things. And I say, well, does that align with overall your lowest area is going to be students growing over time? Do they look at data by student growth? Does it align? Are they monitoring groups of students and their performance that have been identified as a high focus group on your campus? So all of those things are really important pieces to take away as you're getting those results back and you're building those systems. So how I want to lean into this is, again, from my practice, when I would work with campuses, I evaluated where they were. So we're going to start with the yellow box on the right. In some campuses, culturally, teachers are really at the point where they say, I just want to run a pre-made report. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time building data reports, and that's just where I am. And you know what? That's okay. We have lots of pre-made reports in the system that you can start building. Hey, when you go to your PLCs, make sure that you have the incorrect responses report, and make sure that you have the TEAC scaffold report. And so you can set those standards and start where the teachers are, meet them where they are. As you move, the goal of this is to really say, it's okay if we're running pre-made reports. How do we move to sharing data? How do we get to that point where maybe we are creating some data within the system and we're sharing it to teachers? And honestly, this is where I lived for a lot of my career. I would build the data. I would share it with teachers. I would walk in the room, they would click on received views, and we would go through the 2 or 3 data views I would send them, and we would make an action plan. But again, that system was dependent on me. And so I was the one who was hand holding every piece of it. So I quickly learned I have to teach them to fish. And so I finally got to the point where teachers were ready to start creating their own reports and sharing those with others as well. But they were getting to that place where after we created some templates, they could navigate down and they would come to the PLC with their data reports in hand because they understood our systems. So where are you? Are you at a place where teachers are still running pre-made reports? That's great. Are they looking at shared data views that you have given them? Or are they looking at a place where they're creating their own? So it's always a good place for you to really start reflecting on where and how are we moving them along this shift and migration to the overall impact of them owning their own data. And so that's really where we want to go over time. And so we're now going to lean into some really powerful areas in the system where teachers can own their own data and how well they align to systems and structures. And so the first piece that we're really going to talk about is we're going to ask you, how important do you think teacher ownership of their data is? And so are you one of those campuses where it is a top priority? We have our data systems in place and it is happening. Are you kind of thinking it's important, but we really, based on what you said, we probably need to establish that a little bit more. Hopefully you're not neutral and hopefully you're not thinking that's not super important. But where are you? Is it a top priority or is it something you're really working towards? So you can tell us if you're a 1, 2, 3, or a 4. Okay, it looks like it's important, but it needs to be established. Someone did say it's a top priority. Yep, I know that district too. It is a top priority there. What else do we have? It's not as important, it looks like, for some of you, for teachers to own their own data. Some others, it's definitely a top priority. So that's great. So we just want you to think about that. What is it that you're making sure that teachers know about their data in their classroom? And so they're definitely going to be the ones that are taking that piece and they're doing something with it actively within their classroom. So as a key piece, as we start getting into what they have available, we're going to start with a tool that we have that's still somewhat new. It's almost been around about a year, but it's called single test analysis. So this is part of Aware Premium, but this tool really helps teachers to own their data at a very high level. So this tool was really designed for the PLC experience in and of itself. And so you'll see as the little GIF is going through each of these tabs, there is a performance tab where teachers can see exactly how students performed by those levels, performance levels, raw score, and they can delineate between special populations of students and see how they performed despite other larger groups. So the graph automatically changes to represent student populations. They can also look at learning standards and they can look at them immediately by depth of knowledge and see how students are doing on standards from that lens and very quickly be able to see what were our highest performing standards, what were our lowest performing standards, and how have students really been doing in each of these areas. So another great tool for them to really be able to interpret, hey, students understand the standard at level 1, but they do not understand it at depth of knowledge level 3. And then the very last tab is going to be our item response analysis. And again, this is that deep dive into how did a student actually answer the question. So you get a preview of those questions that you're really wanting. How am I going to start scaffolding, and how am I going to change instruction? Well, you get to see them and you get to see the misconceptions. So it guides you through answer distribution by the new interactive questions, and it allows you to really see how students answered each one of these. So extremely powerful for multiple different reasons, but you can even group your kids by a misconception on a drag and drop question. And so something that's incredibly powerful in the new world of testing that we are in. Okay, and so I'm going to turn it back over to Jeremy, and he's going to show you our newest tool. That's the Learning Standard Mastery Tracker.
Yeah, and just I remember when student test single test analysis was coming out, like you just said, being able to preview those TEIs, those technology enhanced items, it felt so amazing to see that and really be able to analyze it at that level. But continuing with that trend, a very soon coming Aware Premium feature is the Learning Standards Mastery Tracker. Some of the main components or things that the Mastery Tracker includes are student data analysis that's actually connected to a very specific TEKS course. Yes, quick views can do that, but it does it in a different way, where student learning standard performance over time is really able, you're really able to get standards side by side and see how is the mastery changing over time as the year progresses, or even from year to year, which I'll talk about a little more here in just a moment. It includes the most recent standard with performance raw score, and it factors in depth of knowledge just like STA does, with a slightly different twist for each of those individual standards. It allows that year-to-year data with some imported in your local assessment, assessment types. Thank you. Where the teacher will have access to the summary data from that tracker year after year. So as you're utilizing the Mastery Tracker system for multiple years in a row, you'll really get that longitudinal look about actual mastering student growth over time. And this can be compared to future years' performance as you identify gaps in potential learning or instruction or whatever applies to your context. And then finally, teacher perception. The teacher perception part is probably the most powerful, because at Eduphoria, we really tout that the teacher is the most valued and most qualified person to actually decide in the moment with that kid that they spend all year with to decide, does that student have that mastery of that particular standard? But that's not without the caveat of saying that that teacher needs to use district-defined terminology to apply those teacher labels to that student mastery label. So there's still a very heavy district and campus leadership influence on how the mastery tracker should be used, but the teachers are the ones that are doing the measuring. And we allow things like comment boxes to make it so that teachers can add observation information or data about why that they set a particular mastery level at a particular point. To kind of preview it, we've got a GIF here that shows a mastery tracker being selected and landing on what we call the student summary view. Now, remember, the point of a mastery tracker is to see how students perform on individual standards using the latest information that you have. Once a tracker is made, the default view, or this student summary view, gives you almost a report card look at the standards across the top and the students down the left side. So you can scroll down and, using the data that I see right here connected to the tracker, to basically decide what is the level of mastery for each of these standards and select from the 3 labels that have been configured by the district. Notes, like I mentioned, can be added for each mastery input to provide that context that the teacher feels is necessary, because not all standards are always assessed on an assessment that could be tied to Aware, or in this case, to a student mastery tracker. Maybe the teacher had a one-on-one session in a tutorial type setting, and the student was able to demonstrate their understanding through some sort of performance assessment, or was able to literally explain or write about it in a way that isn't easy to include here. So those comment boxes allow the teachers to add that specific information. And before we move on to the next type of view that I want to highlight, note when you get a copy of this slide deck, there is a link on this slide on the bottom right for the Mastery webinar that was delivered on April 12th. If you weren't able to attend that webinar, take a moment to actually look at that and try to review it, as we offer a lot of suggestions to on-ramp your implementation of Mastery trackers if you're an Aware Premium district that's ready to dive into this. The next view I'd like to talk about is called the Mastery Summary Overview. In short, this is kind of like the student mastery report card, if you will. This is the piece of the tracker that actually persists from year to year as mastery trackers are archived every single year. So within this mastery overview, I can get information that's across the entire tracker. So at the tracker level, I see the standards down the side, similar to the way the students were listed before, and I see all of the assessments across the top. And as I scroll through all of my information, you may notice there's actually quite a few blanks. Those blanks are probably because Maybe your assessments weren't tied to DOK levels. So we've mentioned that several times throughout this presentation. Marking your assessments with appropriate DOKs can help you align and decide, is the mastery I'm providing actually relevant, in the sense that if I either haven't assigned a DOK or everything's at DOK 1, while the standard itself is really at DOK 2, it's easy to demonstrate mastery at DOK 1 levels when the standard requires DOK 2. So this mastery summary overview gives you that look at a glance. And then you can see towards the right, the total raw score and then the overall perception broken down by standard. So you can see the percentage of kids as it's spread. And as the GIF goes back to that, you'll notice down at the bottom, there are a couple of standards that actually have a 100% where it's not been set. Those are clear key indicators for the teacher and even for the administrator. And yes, the administrators do have the ability to view these, not edit them, but view them. And that will provide, and I'll talk about how that viewing is really helpful here in just a second, but it gives you that chance to catch, oh, you actually have data in for this standard in your tracker, but your mastery haven't been set yet. So try to find some time to get that done. And Emily, if I could ask you to back up one slide, I forgot to mention one thing, and it's easier seen in the previous one. When you look underneath the standard, you'll notice there's two columns, and it's worth calling out. One of them is called latest raw, and the other one is total raw. The total raw score column is the total amount of points that could have been earned across all assessments tied to the tracker that assessed that standard, whereas the latest raw is the one that was most recent on the most recent assessment that kid took that tested that standard. When it comes to actually deciding mastery, we like to encourage people to look at that latest raw more than the overall, because there are many times when a kid over time may not have a standard mastered the first time or two it's assessed, but through remediation, through tutorials, through opportunities to relearn and reassess, by the end of an assessment cycle, they're finally demonstrating and showing that mastery. So the aggregate or total raw may not demonstrate mastery, while the latest raw truly can demonstrate mastery. So we try to separate those in there. Thank you for doing that, ma'am. And let's talk about best practices for using the mastery trackers. Like I said, administrators have the opportunity to actually pull up and view each of the mastery trackers that are relevant to their particular roles and rights. In the beginning of any adoption with mastery tracking, most of the viewing practices are going to be for the purpose of supporting an interpretation of mastery. This tool is unique in that it provides a transparent lens into the cognitive process that enables coaches. Again, we need to make sure that the structure of those conversations are happening so that teachers are selecting groups of students and assessments that make the most sense for what's happening in their classroom. Best practice with mastery tracking isn't necessarily to drop all 120 kids that you teach into a mastery tracker. Maybe we need to focus instead on kids that are on the bubble from moving from one performance level to another. And that doesn't just mean moving from does not meet to approaches, but even from meets to masters, and tracking those kids' performance over time and really narrowing in on areas that can lead us to greater levels of success. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Emily.
All right, perfect timing. We're going to bring it all together and kind of wrap it up and put a bow on it at the very end. And so we really want to just kind of review what we talked about today. And so again, it's that perfect time of year where you're really evaluating your processes. So do you really want to lean in on some lesson planning strategies that we covered? Because again, if you're part of the Eduphoria suite, you have lesson planning within Forethought that you can utilize. Are you really making sure that Strive is really focusing on what actually matches that lesson planning process through your walkthroughs and with your expectations? So making sure that those systems align as well. And then some other last key pieces are, we showed you some really great ways to look at your assessment data and move toward where teachers are reviewing it and then they're owning it. And we have some great tools for ownership where teachers can see domain 1, student performance, student growth, domain 2 with the mastery tracker. And then if you're utilizing student monitoring within Aware, then you have a full MTSS or student monitoring solution as well. So making sure each of those systems align. All right, so we'll hear from you one more time from your learning today. Which of those are you going to investigate? Is it going to be lesson planning and that alignment? Is it going to be your walkthrough data? Is it going to be some student monitoring? You're thinking, okay, we probably need to lean into that student monitoring lens. Is it data analysis for teacher ownership, or is it data analysis at the district or the campus level? So any of these answers are absolutely great. We'll even let you pick 1 and 3 or 1 and 5. You just tell us, what are your thoughts? Oh, I like it. I like it, Ashley. 2, 4, and 5. I like it. We got a 3 and a 5. Another 3. Oh, I like student monitoring. A 1 and a 4. I like it. Another 3. Okay, great. Hopefully each of these, that is really the point of these webinars, is for you to be able to take these pieces away. And again, when you get the slide deck, you're going to be able to click on all of those online help guides and help build those systems in Eduphoria to make sure that they're sound and ready to go for next year. All right, so now we're going to use this last little opportunity to kind of tease you a little bit with some information. And so we really wanted you to stop and think a little bit. We talked a lot about lesson planning. And so what if your lesson planner could really easily draw meaningful conclusions about student learning? So what if it was able to do that for you? What if you were also able to know exactly where to allocate your instructional coaches based off of some of that lesson planning and curriculum? And what if you could easily find out if you tested what was actually taught and if there was true alignment within your systems? So again, we really want you to think about these things, and we're kind of teasing up this information because if you hadn't heard, we are really, the best term I've come up with is we are bulldozing Forethought. We are really starting from scratch. So this is the last year that you'll even see Forethought as an option. And we're going to be creating a new lesson planning and curriculum tool that's really going to solve these issues. It's going to help you to really look at efficiency and see how many times a standard is taught and how many times it is aligned to an assessment perfectly. And it's going to really preemptively help support your teachers and see, hey, we're about to give a test and it has all of these standards on it and you've only taught 5 of them. And so it's really going to be an intuitive tool to allow you to see how much those resources that you're putting a lot of funding into are being utilized. So we wanted you to get excited about that and make sure that you stay tuned. And if we see you at conferences, we're going to be giving you some sneak peeks of the new Forethought and our new tool to help not only with these core fundamentals we talked about today, but really enhance that user experience and meet you where you are. So we're very, very excited about our new Forethought tool that will be coming in the future. All right, so last but not least, we also like to tell you, again, it's that time of the year, we have a teacher learning site that is available. It's free and you can use it with teachers as they come back to help guide them through basics of Aware with a training video and self-reflection and online help. And then, of course, Strive, it offers that up as well to give every teacher the ability to be successful in writing their goals and being successful with those beginning of year practices. So make sure you grab that website and share it out with all of those hands-on learners as you get in new teachers. Okay, we did show you some new navigation today in videos. And so we want to make sure that you also have support for that, because we will really be leaning into the fact that new navigation, you will start missing. If you're going back to classic, you can be honest with yourself. If you're going back to that classic view, you're going to start missing new feature sets, because as we continue to build new features, which you'll see in the next slide, they won't necessarily live in classic Aware. And as we discover bugs in classic Aware, you can probably guess that we're not going to be fixing those as well either. Sooner rather than later, that will go away. And then your new navigation will be the foundation of what you utilize within the system. So we did 4 different webinars. It was actually Jeremy that led those to help guide you through how to utilize all of the new navigation and what it looks like and how it functions compared to classic Aware. All right, and in the last couple of minutes, what is new and next? We have a new line reader. So when students are taking an online assessment and they're reading, we do have a line reader tool that allows them to focus in on their reading. We have new performance levels and how you can set up to 6 different performance levels within the system. And the functionality is outstanding for each of those. So make sure you go review that, because that will affect how you're delivering assessments this school year. We also have student access lists that are new as well. So checking those out and how those affect teachers. And then we showed you today, our Mastery Tracker is our newest tool that will be available as well. All right, some upcoming webinars on August 2nd. We're covering Axiom for accountability and going over the new data elements and how they'll align within Axiom. And then also we're really talking about on August 16th, how to get better faster with effective data analysis tools and templates. So be sure to join us for those events in the future. All right, and I'll check in to see if we have any final questions. If not, I think I ended perfectly on time.
Yes, you did. I do not see any open questions. Make sure if you do have any questions that you do email us at training@eduphoria.net. But I think that you did amazing. Thank you for everyone who participated and asked your questions. You guys were really engaged, and I think this was a great webinar. Hopefully you guys
Thank y'all
enjoyed.
for attending.